end. Our speaker today is Dr. Prissy Fletcher. She is teaching faculty in the Soil and Water and Ecosciences Department at the University of Florida. You may remember Prissy when she was an extension agent in St. Johns County and also an extension agent in Putnam County, and maybe an extension agent somewhere else. I can't remember right now. But she is changing hats, or she's sharing hats, because she also serves as the agricultural liaison for grants and policy, and as an analyst for St. Johns County and promoting St. Johns County. So I have a fun picture of Prissy, I think in a datil pepper field and a beautiful artichoke flower, but I didn't want to forget her Florida heritage. So I have Heritage Park there, because if you've ever been to Heritage Park in Live Oak, that was the family home, because Prissy is a longtime Floridian, native Floridian from a longtime family here in Florida. So we wanted to honor that as well. So Prissy, we welcome you to the Master Gardener webinar. Thank you so much for being here, and with your busy schedule, we really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop share and invite you to share.
Awesome. Thank you for the very warm welcome, and I will pull up my presentation. All right, can y'all see? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again for having me today.
We need it
Yes, ma'am.
full screen then. Could you do full screen? You may
Oh,
have to switch screens.
better?
Not yet. Okay. Not yet. So what I do is I minimize that screen and then amplify the other one. There we go. Good
Got
job.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. All righty. So, as Wendy already introduced, I am Prissy Fletcher, and I'm really excited to be chatting with y'all today about new and niche crops for Florida. So I am from the Soil Water Sciences Department and also with St. Johns County Administration. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. And thank you, Wendy, for plugging the family gardens now in Live Oak. If you're ever in the area, feel free to stop by anytime and check out the grounds. Or if I'm in the area, y'all want to hang out with me, we'll get Uncle Daniel and open up the house and go inside. So it's a really nice facility, thanks to the Florida Forever program. So with that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. And why are we researching alternative crops, and what is it? Alternative to what? And then I wanted to talk about a couple of crops that I personally have had the opportunity to work with, and researchers that I know and love that I want to brag about. So I am a native Floridian from Live Oak, Florida, Swanee High School. And I grew up on a farm. So I grew up on a tree farm. My family was very involved with the turpentine industry. So we produce pine trees, and historically we were in collaboration with the naval industry. So for the turpentine being tapped from the pine trees. And then over time, we evolved into pine straw harvesters. So if you ever see the pine straw mulch in the pretty landscape beds, it was farms like ours that helped produce that product. So I am a University of Florida graduate, and I have completed my degrees in soil and water sciences because I love it so much. I love getting my hands dirty. I actually started out as a journalism major and enjoyed my minor courses so much that I just flipped it and made it my major. So I had the pleasure of being the Master Gardener Coordinator in Putnam County from 2013 to 2019, and then moved on to St. Johns County to become the Agricultural Extension Agent. And there I was based out of the Hastings Center, where I performed many demonstrations of the alternative crop research so our farmers could see the crops themselves, see them in production, and let us tinker and figure out the aggravations for them. And as Wendy also pointed out, I'm now also with St. Johns County. So I help with their policies. I help determine if there's a grant available that could support our agricultural community. So I'm back and forth between Gainesville and St. Augustine, and I love it. And it's really great to be able to support my farmers in my county, such as these folks in these photos. And my sister, that's my sister Heather in the blue dress. I drag her to all the farm table events with me. Oh, keep it a family affair. So we're here to talk about new alternative niche crops. But alternative to what? Well, it kind of depends on where you are. So where I'm based in St. Johns County, we are the potato capital of Florida. So when I'm talking about our alternatives in this area, I mean alternatives to potatoes. And why is that? Well, our acreage is continuing to go down, our agriculturally zoned acreage, I mean. And that's because of urban sprawl, of our growth and development in the community. So we are trying to find ways to keep farmers in existence, keep them viable, making sure that they can maintain and sustain their living for themselves and for their family legacy. So potatoes we'd be looking for alternatives to potatoes in my area, but if we go down to Central and South Florida, it may be more, what is an alternative to citrus? So it's whatever that staple crop is in that region, that state, whatever it may be, you're trying to find an alternative to either complement it or replace it. But there are many reasons outside of that of why we research new and niche crops. Cutting edge research. We are a top university for agricultural research. We are constantly on the cutting edge trying to find new things, never just accepting the status quo. Well, something works, great. Can we make it even better, more efficient? Our farmers need to be able to survive in these times. It's extremely expensive to grow produce, and anyone who's gone to the grocery store or market is aware that prices are very high right now. And whatever we can do to help those production costs make things more efficient. We also have changing climates. If you look at the latest USDA hardiness zone map, there are hardiness zones that have changed within our state. And those also impact our production cycles. So even us, we have a potato and cabbage festival and now bacon at the end of April. But now our cabbage season is starting to finish a little bit earlier because by May it's just too darn hot. We have pests gaining resistance. So I completed my master's degree in citrus, and I was focusing on the insect, the Asian citrus psyllid, and I was evaluating pesticides that growers were commonly using. And we were already seeing back in 2014 resistance in some of these insecticides. So having to find alternatives to even managing crops are important. Our consumer demands change, whether they want more produce that's organic, or they want the perfect, most spherical, symmetrical produce, or they just want different colors, different flavors, textures, and those are things we have to keep into consideration. But at the end of the day, especially from the perspective of our plant breeders, it's fun, it's exciting, it's new, and it's different. So there are many reasons why we look into alternative and new crops. But where did a lot of this begin? So I started working with the university back in 2009, and that is just about the time when we were learning about citrus screening and detecting it in our state. So citrus was a huge inspiration for why we needed to look for alternatives. But as we've been researching these different crops, it was not just citrus that benefits from it. However, it's just important to note our decline of this industry had a huge impact on the need to look at other ways to keep our citrus growers in business. So citrus screening, quick recap for you. So this is a bacterial infection that affects the phloem of the tree. So think of our phloem as pipes within a tree, because I think about irrigation. That's how it makes sense in my brain. And as these bacteria colonize the phloem, that population gets so great that it plugs it, just like pipes in your home or in your landscape getting clogged with years of hair or baby wipes. And so it's difficult for water nutrients to move throughout the tree. So we see that slow decline because it's struggling to move water nutrients throughout the plant. And because those nutrients and sugars cannot move, that's why the fruit tastes so bitter, because those sugar starches cannot get to the fruit through the phloem as efficiently as it once could before. So this disease is spread by the Asian citrus psyllid, and it will infect the tree by feeding. So it's a sap feeding insect. So as it's feeding and as it's releasing its saliva back, it's injecting this bacteria. So this arrived in 1998. And since then, we have seen a 94% decline in citrus. That is humongous. That is a huge number. And it's important to share with the public as you're being consulted by homeowners with citrus. If they have defeat, this, we're all dealing with this. This is a statewide problem. And the best thing you can do is select varieties that have tolerance, use the tree bags, take advantage of the FDAX program for the Tamarixia wasp that can be released for dooryard citrus, but also inform your friends and residents and your clients about how this is the reason why orange juice is so expensive at the grocery store. So I recently attended the citrus show at Fort Pierce a couple of weeks ago, and we were chatting with the Citrus Research Foundation, and they were explaining their concerns and what they need help with explaining to the public. At this point, it's either breeding cultivars that can resist the disease or anticipate continuing to see the price of orange juice climb. So there's a lot of work we have to do, but I still have a lot of hope for the citrus industry, and I hope you do as well. But there are some alternatives that I'm really excited to share. And one of them is artichokes. So I personally am very excited about this particular crop because it was my PhD research. And people would ask me, why artichokes? I'm like, well, I'm based in Hastings. I'm surrounded by all these people doing potato research, and I just wanted to bring something different to the table. And fortunately, this wonderful man, Dr. Shinsky Agahara, he is with the Horticultural Sciences Department, and he is studying many different crops that can be produced in Florida. He's a great plant physiologist, and he is the researcher who initiated this concept. And it started in Balm. And at that time, we in Hastings had a director named Gary England who decided that he, after his experience touring artichokes in Castroville out in California, that our part of the state could also potentially be a home for artichoke production. So we decided to ask Shinsky if we could team up and let's evaluate artichokes in Northeast Florida. So if you're not familiar with artichokes, these are native to the Mediterranean, so preference for cool, dry environmental conditions. In California, Castroville is the artichoke capital, and that's where about 99% of it's produced. So most of everything that we're getting is migrating from the opposite side of this continental United States. And so with that, just that point in itself, thinking about the supply chain, thinking about your gas emissions, what can we do to make it fresher and have a longer shelf life because it doesn't have to ride across the country. So we started with variety trials, using commercial varieties that had been used out in California. And over time, we've been transitioning into breeding programs, so developing new germplasm for our Florida humid environment, and also moving on to nutrient rate studies, which was part of my PhD, looking at phosphorus rates, because the bud that we are consuming, that's an immature flower. And as you know, with products that are like considered bloom boost, they have a lot of phosphorus in those fertilizer blends. So I wanted to evaluate the ideal phosphorus rate for bud production. And because there's no competition on the East Coast, there's just a lot of opportunity for multiple growers to get involved and experiment with this crop. And one thing we learned along the way, one of my favorite aspects of science and research, are the unexpected finds, such as its use and application as an ornamental cut flower, which I'll talk about in a second. So globe artichokes, and if you Google artichokes, just know there is a globe artichoke and there's a Jerusalem artichoke, and they are botanically different. So globe artichokes, these are giant thistles in the aster family. So aster family, other crops would be sunflowers or lettuce, for example. So these are related. And whenever I do plant family activities with my 4-H kids, I love to do the aster family, because they're always so shocked when I show them a lettuce and an artichoke. Like, these are related, they're family. They're like, no. I'm like, oh yes, huh? Like, don't you have cousins that you're related to that don't look like you? It happens. So these large thistles are prickly, some more than others, depending on the variety or cultivar, but they can reach 4 by 4 feet at maturity. They have the preference for mild winters with low humidity. So already Florida's really not ideal, right? But they do have moderate salt tolerance, which is good for those of us on the coast. And they like a loamy soil texture and good drainage. This is a very long-term crop, by the way. This takes 5 to 6 months to produce. So many obstacles to be dealing with. So we're talking about a Mediterranean crop, wanting nearly half a year to produce an environment it was not meant for. So how do we work that? How do we make that work? Well, plant growth regulators. So I am a soil scientist, and part of this research really forced me to understand plant physiology and the importance of our naturally occurring plant hormones, such as these plant growth regulators called gibberellins, gibberellic acid, or GA3 for this particular hormone. So what Dr. Agahara researched was the application of this hormone to plants, which is naturally occurring in plants, but depending on the species, it has different impacts. So for artichokes, for example, it will trick the plant into thinking it got cold. So there are many plants that need chill in order to emerge or to break dormancy or to produce flowers. So artichokes, if they receive this hormone at the 8 to 10 true leaf, so not our little baby cotyledons, so once we have truly expanded leaves, when we apply that product and then reapply, then the plant, even though it was in a warm, humid environment, it has been, from a hormonal application, it is thinking, oh, I got the chill I needed. I need to produce buds. And this has different applications for different species, like I said. So tulips, for example, if you applied this type of hormone to tulips, it makes the stems shorter. Why would you want that? Well, if you are planting them in pots, you don't want long, lengthy stems because they need to be easy to package and ship. So this is one of his many published trials that we learned is very, very necessary in order for these buds to form. Because we learned our first year without applying them the next to no yield that we had. So with the trials that we were working with, we had Colorado Red Star, Green Globe Improved, Green Queen, Imperial Star, Opal, and Purple Red Magna. And we initially started tinkering with the planting dates, whether it be October and November, and they vary depending on when we planted them by that variety. Oh, Wendy, I think you got a question. Wendy's your
I'm
hand up?
I'm I'm sorry. Someone had tuned in earlier, but we're gonna hold the question for later. Very sorry,
Oh,
Chrissy.
oh no,
Go
there's
back to
no worries.
artichokes. I'm gonna lower my hand. Sorry.
You're fine. All good. So with our variety trials, I mentioned we were focusing on commercial cultivars that were already established out west that we wanted to see how they perform here with different, we're staggering the planting times. So depending on the variety, some had a preference of October versus November. And those of you who've lived in Florida for a couple years or longer, you know there is a big difference between October and November. October is still pretty darn hot. And so those cooler evening temperatures really have an impact on some of these, such as Colorado Red and Opal. And I thought it was interesting that the purple red colored varieties were the ones that had that preference. But at the end of the day, you could still do either month. But the point of this is our best varieties were these three: the green globe improved, the green queen, the imperial star. And those of y'all who are wondering, can I get these to garden with at home? Absolutely. Both green globe improved, imperial star are very easy to find gardening retail websites. Green Queen is owned by BASF, and it's 40 cents per seed with a minimum of a 1,000 seed order. So if that's something you're really wanting to try, just that's quite an expense. So just be mentally prepared for that, or ask if you have other investors that want to garden with you. Something fun that we did in attempt to assist our breeders with knowing what, from a curb appeal perspective, was most interesting. We went to the St. Augustine Farmers Market, which is located at the amphitheater right on the Anastasia Island. We had 83 participants, and we set out all of our varieties, just imagining you're shopping and I'm a vendor and this is what I have on display. What, just by physical appearance, do you find most enticing? What would you want to purchase if I were selling artichokes at this market? And we were tied with the Green Queen and the Colorado Red Star. And so Colorado Red was a very poor performer, but Green Queen was one of our best yielding. So that was really helpful to know, as far as from what the consumer demand is, what growers would have the easiest time selling in this location. We also looked into cut flowers. So when my very first year of doing these trials was in 2019, and what happened? COVID, the pandemic, everything shut down, right? So one thing that I could say about our farm manager at this center was he was so proactive about cleaning up our fields the second we were done with research. Well, because of our situation and us having to have limited people on site at a time and things slowed down, we didn't get a chance to till in our field plot, and the plants were left out there. And I just saw these vivid, bright purple colors. And I look, I'm like, this is the artichoke. It makes this. I had no idea. This was new to me. Being a native Floridian, first time growing artichokes, I had no clue. So I reached out to my friends at Bee Hill Blooms, a local flower farmer, and their sibling had just moved back to Florida from California, and she was very familiar with this and knew how gorgeous they were and knew about their shelf life. Like, well, I don't know how many Floridians are going to know what this is or want it, period, but let's see what happens at the same farmer's market. So we donated 30 cut flowers, charged $5 per stem. They sold out in 30 minutes, and the demand continued because people were really unhappy with us that they sold out so quickly. So it was exciting to see that, when we get to the point where we get so warm in about Mother's Day, whatever buds are still on the plants, they are going to start fluorescing. Your buds are going to start opening, which means you can't eat it anymore. It's just going to taste nasty and fibrous. But those buds won't go to waste because you can sell those secondary buds. And this is just like broccoli. You cut your main head, and then baby florets start popping up after. Same with these. So our thoughts were, well, take your secondary buds and sell those as a cut flower that you can have two markets that you can use with this crop. So That was artichokes are still really fun. I've been tinkering with them in my backyard. It's I have beach sand and they do not like it. They do not like they like the drainage, but they get thirsty really easily. But moving on to another new emerging crop, bamboo. Even though bamboo isn't new to us as gardeners, right? We're very familiar with it in its ornamental applications. But we're also now researching it as a citrus alternative. So here we have Dr. Katie Yampachini. He is a cohort of mine in the Soil Water Ecosystem Sciences Department. So it's always nice to see someone outside of horticultural science get involved with plants. Davey and I have been friends since we were students. We both worked in the soil physics lab together, working on citrus. He was focusing on nutrient management, and I was studying pesticide management, but we were both interacting with how irrigation rates impact the flow of nutrients and pesticides. So I've got a lot of love for this man. He's one of the most down to earth, approachable people, and he's always happy and smiling, always. So if you ever have an opportunity to get him as a guest speaker, he's just so full of life and joy and has so many good things to share. So bamboo is being evaluated as a potential alternative to citrus. And this is a recent development, probably over the past 5 years. There are opportunities with this crop to include the edible shoots as timber and other biomaterials. So we are focusing on the clumping bamboo types. So as master gardeners, y'all are very familiar with invasive species. So it's important while we are trying to find assistance for alternatives to citrus, we got to find alternatives that aren't going to wreak havoc in our ecosystems, right? So focusing on those dendrocalamus species that are clumping, they work really well in existing grove land, and bamboo will feed into a global market that's valued at nearly $67 billion. That's incredible. So many of our Asian countries are our main source, but we have the climate here to be able to supplement that. And if we can use that to help keep our citrus growers thriving, even if it's not completely with citrus, that's okay. Because some of these alternatives aren't meant to completely replace, but complement existing systems, because we don't want citrus to go away. We just want to make sure the farmers have an income while it's taking a long time to find those solutions. So with bamboo, research is needed for ideal nitrogen rates because we don't have any to go by. Definitely not for commercial applications especially. So Davey has already published a 1-year greenhouse study, and his takeaway from that was higher nitrogen rates inhibited the growth of bamboo. So he already knew that more is not better, which we've learned with many crops. As we apply higher rates of fertilizer, we eventually hit a plateau. So it's important to know where that happy medium is so that we are helping the plants grow and thrive without being an environmental impact. We don't want to be contributing to nutrient runoff and leaching. So bamboo, after established, which is about 4 to 5 years after planting, it can be harvested annually, which offers the farmers a new source of income. What's really convenient about this, because we talked about applications in wood timber production, so there's already packing, processing facilities that could accommodate this. But we just have to learn how do we grow it commercially and how do we transport it from A to B to get to those products that can be used worldwide. Growers have already planted more than 1,000 acres of clumping bamboo in the state, but the concerns are it's very labor intensive because this is a lot of hand manual labor, and labor shortages are a real thing. Hard, physically backbreaking hard work is really not something many people want to do anymore. And so it's important that we find ways to that's why mechanical harvesting comes into play with so many crops. But at the same time, we need labor. We need people that want to get outside and get their hands dirty. So hopefully what I'm trying to do on the teaching side of things is inspiring more students to want to get out there and be a part of these operations. And if they don't want to get their hands dirty, okay, go into engineering, figure out how to make our irrigation more efficient, figure out how to make our tractors more precise. There's so many ways to be involved, and the farming industry needs more people to help. So if you didn't know already, we do have a Florida native bamboo species called switch cane, and it grows naturally along the rivers throughout Florida. And if you want to learn more about it, you can check out this fun YouTube video from Tia. Also, so I lived in Gainesville for many, many years, and now that I'm back teaching there again, one of my personal favorite locations, Kanapaha Botanical Gardens. So if you want to learn more about bamboo species and see them in person, highly recommend, if you're in the Gainesville area, to check out that botanical garden, explore the bamboo species, and know that every January they even have a bamboo sale, which is super fun. If you want to come a little bit north, more northeast, Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens also has the Asian Bamboo Gardens. So another place where you can go and tour and learn about the different varieties and the colors. They're so beautiful. And just as you hear them knocking each other as the wind's blowing, it's just very relaxing. It's just beautiful. All right, so another crop that I've had the joy of working with, specialty pumpkins. This goes back to my days in Putnam County when I was asked by a local farmer that had a farm stand if there was any opportunity for us to be able to produce pumpkins in Florida. And I said, we absolutely can, because I know we do it in Live Oak where I'm from, but that is a different climate, different hardiness zone. We do get cooler in our winters, but I was aware of our native Seminole squash, and it inspired me to reach out to our pumpkin breeder to see if this is something that we could actually do. Would this make sense? So what we have been working on together, and I also tied 4-H into this because there's just too many colors and too much fun not to. But with our pumpkins, generally speaking, the public thinks of our jack-o'-lanterns. They think of big carving pumpkins. So there are many types of pumpkins, though, different species, endless varieties. So what we were wanting to determine is, what can we grow that's pretty, that has ornamental flair to it, that also is edible and can have this shelf life to extend into our Thanksgiving holiday so we can make our yummy pumpkin pies. So that's a grant that we have been, we recently applied for through USDA NIFA, which was accepted. Woohoo! So just waiting for the next steps. But what we decided to start with was, let's focus on what we know are the edible types and our natives. And if there are some ornamentals that can survive, awesome. But we essentially went through the Johnny Seed catalog and just ordered a variety of types that we had either seen a local farmer produce once before, or just the genetics sounded like it had promise. But at the end of the day, another purpose of designing or growing pumpkins like this is to also assist with our issues with the landfill. We have so much waste. If people, because not everyone can compost, not everyone has a yard, not everyone has the space to do it. So what if we can help, instead of throwing away our pumpkins, keep them and cook with them, so you are making the most efficient use possible from start to beginning. So when we were looking at our specialty pumpkins, so we know the Peppos are mostly our ornamentals, our acorn squash, our Maximas are winter squash, mostly edible. And then we have our Machadas. So those are more heat tolerant. So that's why when I was looking at my list, I was trying to focus on the Machadas, just because of our planting season and what I was trying to get out of them being something that's tasty. Because our native squash So yummy. And I use squash, pumpkin interchangeably just because commonly goes either way. But in order for us to make these thrive in the summer months, we had to use the reflective mulch, which confuses the bugs. So bugs have very poor vision. They are traveling towards the light. So they see the reflection of the sun in the silver mulch and they get very confused and fly away. So it was a great way for us to reduce drastically our need for insecticides because those borers can get very, very intense. But in order to make your Halloween market, you have to plant in July. Y'all know what July is like in Florida. It's intense. The plants struggle. And also, it's usually the 1 month of the year in my area where farmers take their vacation and they don't want to have to plant anything. But, and again, to make those market windows, because people want to buy pumpkins for Thanksgiving, they want to buy them for Halloween. So you have to be able to time it for those peak seasons. So we evaluated the fruit count and we evaluated the weights by the different varieties that we evaluated. And our native Seminole was the showstopper with the greatest number of fruits produced, which was pretty excellent. But then as far as weight goes, our French fairy tale pumpkin, the muskie, had the greatest weight. So why does that matter? Well, it depends on how you're selling your product. Are you selling it by count or by weight? That's really important to know when you're determining what varieties. And once again, because I love public feedback, I love input from consumers and shoppers, we went to another farmer's market and I took the pumpkins with us and once again asked people, what is your favorite by curb appeal? You know, you're just walking by looking at these beautiful colors and shapes and sizes. What catches your eye? And number one was porcelain doll, our pink pumpkin, followed by Gerardelle, our blue. And one thing I learned when it comes to consumer surveys, names have a huge impact on people's opinions. So the Seminole, for example, I thought being the native, it'd be one of the top voted ones, but it wasn't. And people who were diehard Gator fans were like, absolutely not. I'm not voting for Seminole. So I think that the votes might have been a little bit skewed because of that bias. So if I were to do this again, or if anyone else were to do this type of public survey, just give them a 1, 2, 3, 4, an A, B, C, D. Don't give them the real name because it definitely impacts people's votes. Oh, so if you're going to grow cucurbits at home, which I totally recommend. It's so much fun. Pick a high and dry location. Know that our sandy soils are typically very heavy loaded with nematodes. That was my biggest issue in my home garden. So adding in that compost, adding in your marigolds as a natural repellent in your gardens. If you're aiming for Halloween, you're going to want to plant no later than the end of July, 1st of August. Direct seeding is the best way to go. And we have all these great companies that can help provide you endless cultivars and uses. And just be sure that you're scouting regularly. Oh, Wendy, yes, ma'am.
I do have a question this time.
Yeah.
Tina is wondering if all of them are edible. So I know the more jack-o'-lanterns may be a little bit thicker, but can you eat them all?
No, you can't eat them all. And the jack-o'-lantern, if you took a bite or two, you'll be okay. But if you were to consume a high volume, it can make you sick. So please do not eat jack-o'-lanterns. The cattle might be able to tolerate them, but they have a very different gastrointestinal tract than ourselves. So please stick with your edible types, please.
Thanks, Prissy.
You're so welcome. And also keep an eye on pollination. So keep an eye out for your you'll see the actual bulbous part underneath the female flower where your fruit's going to form. Those typically come after. So keep that in mind. If you see mostly the long, skinny male flowers at the beginning, that's very normal. And that's just nature ensuring there's plenty of pollen already out in the environment before the female flowers form. So again, super normal. Be watching for caterpillars and all those other critters because The cucurbits are loved by all. Because of our time, there's so many alternative crops and new things coming out. I couldn't list everything, but just a few folks and crops to keep an eye out as you're watching the news and reading your IFAS blogs. Dr. Flavia Zambon from Horticultural Sciences is looking into sugar apples, a tropical fruit. She is a citrus researcher based in Indian River, and she is also looking into grapefruit cultivars. And she's looking at types for people like me that don't normally eat grapefruit. And it's weird. I love sour everything. But when it comes to grapefruit, I can't get into it. But they're developing some cultivars that have a little bit more sugar and palatability to them. But at the end of the day, we already have IFAS publications on sugar apples as a garden for South Florida, but Flavia is looking into how can we cultivate it for our citrus industry as an alternative. Another citrus guru, Dr. Manjul Dutt, also in horticultural sciences and our current president of the Florida State Horticultural Society. He is the one evaluating our finger limes. So he planted some of these at one of our farms in Hastings that has transitioned from sod to citrus and incorporated some finger limes. And there has been great excitement from our local chefs who would like to use this as a garnish and ingredients in their local recipes. So it's really exciting when the local community is excited and wants to be a part of new crop exploration. And last but not least, Dr. Herman Sandoya, also horticultural sciences. He is our lettuce breeder. And while lettuce is not new, it's been very established in Florida, especially in the Belle Glade area, in the muck soils. In North Florida, it's been a huge staple in our hydroponic systems. But what Herman is looking into as new when it comes to lettuce that doesn't bolt in the heat, and lettuce that doesn't turn pink as it ages. So that the pink rib that happens on the leaves of the lettuce as it gets older, it won't hurt you. You can eat it, but just gives some people the ick. So that's something he's breeding for with his students. And the bolting was something that he and I researched together to determine of his germplasm what was more tolerant of North versus South Florida systems. So it's always fun to be able to, again, demonstrate and trial what they're doing for the public to see what these researchers are doing in the applications of their environment and their industry. And Herman's another one that's just super kind and easygoing. I mean, everyone in this presentation that I've referenced is amazing and kind and brilliant. I just love Herman. And with that, I wanted to thank you so much for having me today. I love bragging about what my research cohorts are doing. I love being able to take their research and applying it into the gardens or the local farms or markets and getting to share it with you as well so we can all spread the great knowledge. So please feel free to call or email me. If you're in Gainesville or St. Augustine, come by and see me. And I've got to plug Sunday, April 12th, Tour Day Farm, St. Augustine and Elkton. Yes, Hastings is potato capital of Florida, but our farms extend outside of Hastings. So our local ag center, master gardeners are going to be there. Beekeepers are coming. It's going to be awesome. And with that, I will conclude my presentation.
Good. Well, you've got lots of questions. So we'll start kind of up at the top for someone said, why aren't pond can tangerines grown more commercially in North Florida? That even with the cold weather, it did better than the Satsuma. So I'll let you answer that if you know.
Yeah, I love the pond can tangerines personally. They're so yummy, and I personally have been planting the sugar bells and the tangos in my yard. but those are making a comeback. So the citrus industry moved south historically, where they wouldn't have to freeze protect as much as they do up here. But as y'all know from experience, our tangerines, our mandarins do fabulously in North Florida. I mean, that's why we have Fruit Cove, the town of Mandarin. We have all these little villages and areas that are
Orange
named after our
Springs,
historical.
orange, orange
Yes,
everything, right?
Satsuma, Putnam County.
Satsuma, right?
Hello.
Yep.
So it is making a comeback, but a lot of the industry as it moved away was focused especially on the fresh oranges and the juicing oranges. So our mandarins and the poncan tangerines, they've been more of a dooryard type,
Kind of
but
a
I'm happy to
specialty or dooryard, right?
yeah, yeah, but I have two growers in my county that just
Okay.
started planting them for U-pick. So I think that trend is going to be evolving where we are going to see more commercial, especially as the industry's migrating back up north a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, the psyllids still survive here, but at least we get enough cold snaps to knock down the population a bit. But yeah, a lot of great breeding efforts going into those mandarins and tangerines.
Okay. How long does the artichoke cut flower live once it's cut?
Ooh, great question. So the very vibrant purple will last for a couple weeks, but if you dry it out, it will maintain that for years. And I'm telling you from personal experience because I've given them out to my friends at work and we've dried them out, put them in our little vases in our office, and they're still intact. They're still purple. They're still beautiful. They haven't rotten. They aren't nearly as vibrant, but they are still somehow intact and working out.
I
So
think a little
I
gold spray paint will go a long way on those things.
I wish I knew why they last so long, but it makes
Yeah,
me happy that they
they're
do.
tough. So Tina was like, where could we sample those varieties of artichoke? I know that that was kind of a moment in time, but do you see any trials continuing?
Yeah, so Shinsky, Dr. Agahara, is focusing with another breeder whose name escaped me, and I don't want to butcher it or say the wrong name, but they are creating new germplasm for our Florida climate. So, what I hope is that once those are ready to be tested, because the next step will be all right, we've tested them out at the research facility, now let's take them to the farms. I hope one day that will be a table at Flavors of Florida and other alternative crop
Well, or
conferences.
have them think about having a Master Gardener field day on that, to invite the Master Gardeners to come out and help with the trials and taste selection and that sort of thing. We're here to help with stuff like that. So if you
Love
could
that. I would be
do
happy to
that,
spread the word to get that going again.
good. Um, Veronia is wondering, do we need to replant the artichokes? So 5 months you harvest, and then what happens after that?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. So we are growing them from a commercial standpoint as annuals. So we are planting them October-ish, and they're ready by March, and then flowers are ready by Mother's Day, and then we would till them back into the soil, make them help us regain that residual organic matter buildup. But from a gardening perspective, because I take everything I do in the research field and try to tinker with it at home just to see what happens. My green queens, I planted them in the yard. They they died back in the summer, and then once we started cooling down, end of October, early November, they emerged again.
Hmm.
So that was very, very encouraging. Now that was just green queen. My opal did not come back. She was very unhappy with me and just withered out. So every
Okay.
variety is different.
Brenda remembers that olive trees were really brought up as a new and niche crop, and that it was a conversation, and then it was not a conversation anymore.
Yeah, we really did a big push with Mediterranean crops for a while, the olives, the pomegranates, artichokes too. And with all of those things, it boils down to these are genetics for Mediterranean crops. And we are in a humid, subtropical or tropical if you're in South Florida climate. And so those are things that we have to figure out how to adapt to. But that's what our plant breeders are for. So we're getting there. We are definitely getting there. But those three that I mentioned that are already existing in cultivation, there are available seeds for sale. We already know those will work. But right now we're focusing on annual production because those that came back for me, they came back, but they didn't produce any buds.
Okay, okay. And let's see. Seminole County said they have a bamboo farm on the east side of their county, so that's cool,
Yay! Davey will be happy to hear that.
right? And some Brenda bought an ornamental blue pumpkin with a sticker on it that said "I'm delicious," and it was delicious. So that's cool. One of the blues are.
Yeah,
Um,
Jaredell's yummy, and also um, North Georgia Candy Roaster. Please Google it. It looks like a giant pink banana. It is so sweet, and it is the best pie I've ever had. And I'm very biased. That was my favorite, but it also looks weird, and I like quirky stuff.
what's the name again?
North Georgia Candy Roaster.
Okay. All right.
That is an exceptionally good cucurbit,
Okay,
and the
fantastic.
kids will love it.
Um, Janice said her sugar apple died in Volusia County, and yeah, it's too cold. Yep.
Mm, yep.
And Basem is asking about chufa seeds, and do you know what that is? That's the
Mm-mm.
that's a little nugget in nutsedge.
Oh, okay.
So I can't promote nutsedge, but if I was hungry enough, I might eat it. I don't know. So
Yeah, no, I've not heard of any attempt to produce the chufa seeds, but I know that Bob is looking at the applications of paper mulch for nut sedge control.
okay, that's good.
Kind of random
Um,
segue. That's about all I got for you.
Good. And what about someone's reminding us that they love field days. So if you know of any field days that I need to know about, please let me know.
All right.
And
We
someone
can
said
always
bam.
organize one for you. We can always create one if we need be. If y'all
uh,
want to come my way.
Okay, well, let's talk about that with the right time of day, what right time would be. Someone
Got
would
it.
like you to put the QR code up for your tour to farm again and maybe make it bigger. And let's see. So are they growing bamboo for the bamboo shoots or roots? And is that what the push is?
Yeah,
Like
we
the
want the
Takanoko,
shoots. If we want the fibrous part of it, so that's what we can use.
but
Um,
not to eat, but for timber?
well, I think the new shoots are have edible properties, but
Mm,
I can't remember if that's more for livestock feed or 'cause, I mean there are types of bamboo applications.
okay.
'Cause like even when you're eating sushi, you have like bamboo leaves. So I
Right,
mean,
right, right.
but it's going to have edible and industrial applications and also replace some wood products as
Yeah.
well.
Um, have you thought of are they talking about growing coffee in our old citrus um lands? Maybe further south?
Yeah, South Florida could do it, but we haven't been talking about it as an alternative, but
Okay.
as a complement, absolutely in South Florida systems.
And do you know if the finger limes are a little bit more tolerant of the citrus greening?
Yes, so they can survive a grove that already has greening, which is
Mm.
really, really excellent. I mean, it's a very different texture, but it's still, hey,
Yeah.
we got our limes. It's something, whatever we can do to prevent those groves from being plowed over and have asphalt laying down. That's our goal. It doesn't matter if they're planting finger limes or artichokes or the calabaza. We just want the citrus growers to be able to keep their land and keep something growing on it. And whatever we can do to just keep their livelihood sustainable is the goal at the end of the day.
Someone once told me, when you see them planting pines after the after the citrus, the next thing they're going to plant is houses. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah,
Yep.
probably so. Probably so. Folks are excited about the sugar apples, the other, and wondering if any other annonas are being considered. Of course, that would be down in Miami-Dade, Broward and Palm Beach. But let's see how she does with the Annona squamosa first. And do all of the alternative crops require hand harvesting? Are any of them able to be picked mechanically?
Right now, everything is hand harvested that I can think of, except for, well, blueberries. We do have our blueberry breeding program. Blueberries aren't an alternative, but we are breeding them for mechanical cultivation. So now when you go out to, I used to tell people, okay, focus, depending on where you are in the state, rabbit eye versus southern high bush. Now it's not just these varieties by species, but are you purchasing something that was meant to be shaken, that was meant to be harvested mechanically that way versus picking? And some of them are so low chill that they're going to be evergreen in how they perform in central versus north. So much work being done with our evolving climates and our lack of labor. Yeah, people just, I mean, I don't blame them. I take my students out. I told Wendy about our field trip last week with my students. I took them to see crops that are hand harvested so that when they are at the store and they think about the cost, they think about what it took to get that crop out of the field. It wasn't just scooped up. Someone had to bend over with their cabbage knife and cut it and throw it and move over. And again, thousands and thousands of times. So shout out to all the people that produce and harvest food on the farm and the garden. God bless your backs. Thank you.
Yeah. I do think about that when the bag of whatever goes south in the crisper, and I'm thinking to myself, how much effort it took to get it to my refrigerator for me not to chop up those cucumbers and eat them. What's wrong with me?
Right. Well, if y'all want to bend over and cut cabbage, we can plan that for next year. If y'all want to have a field trip.
They might
The
like that.
values the farm labor.
Yeah. So someone is asking about the Jerusalem artichoke, which is a sunchoke, which is also a aster, right? But more for
Exactly.
the
Yep.
tuber as an annual crop. Is anyone working on those?
Not that I'm aware of, and I kept coming across it in my literature review, and I prior to working with artichokes didn't even know there was a Jerusalem artichoke. So it was just something interesting for I just give that as an aside when you're looking up, just know we have different types. But yeah, they're all asters in the same family. So that's nice when we're talking about crop rotation, having a different family, because my growers are mostly potatoes, but some of them also grow peppers, and those are all in the nightshade family, right? So whatever we can do to get them to
The
break up
rotate.
that
Yeah.
cycle and reduce our pest pressures, awesome.
Marsha's asking about dragon fruit. Mike is asking about more of the tropicals, white sapote. And the area where we grow tropical fruit in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, it's urban encroachment is coming in so much, where we can grow these subtropicals and tropical fruit is going to be the houses and the development is coming. It's really going to be pushing that out. So,
Yep.
I mean, even though we could grow them, I don't know if the space is going to be available for that. It's still going to remain very niche, I think.
100%. We're dealing with the same thing up in Northeast Florida in St. Johns County. We used to be this quiet, sleepy retirement community, and now the urban sprawl is just insane. And farmland's already cleared, it's already level. So
Right.
that's what they're targeting. So whatever we can do to keep these folks in existence, because at the end of the day, we've all got to eat, right?
Well, and I think, how forward thinking is St. Johns County to put an ag liaison in like yourself to kind of stand up for that farmer and share the importance of agriculture to the makeup of the county, but to help to try and preserve those farmlands to keep them viable and a big source of income for Florida. So we have a few other questions. Someone wants to know if you've ever heard of vertically growing potatoes like the Amish do. I don't know. Do you know about that?
I've never tried, but I think that's really awesome. And whatever works for you, whatever style or trend, or I love it. And if you grow it that way and you're successful, please send me pictures because that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it does. And then Clara's thinking about Camellia sinensis or tea. And I know we grow tea. The Bigelow has a 100-acre plantation in South Carolina, but I wonder if that might be an alternative for us one day to grow our own tea.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one plug that I did not have the time to go
Oh,
into
I know what you're
today,
going to talk
but the
about.
Yopon holly.
Mhm.
Brian White with the Yopon Brothers. He's at Flavors of Florida every year at Ben Hill Griffin showing off his product. You can get it on campus
Yeah,
in our little market store. So um, Ilex vomitoria doesn't really, it's not a good marketing botanical name, but luckily has not affected his marketing or his sales. But I mean, it's our native tree, naturally caffeinated, used to be utilized in tribal rituals, and it's still a great tea. So we are finding alternatives to tea. So we can absolutely do the camellias as well. I mean, I love them as an ornamental, but you know, it's tea too. I love tea. So the more the merrier. But yeah,
right.
we are definitely looking at tea alternatives as well.
Well, Prissy, thank you so much. And remember, think of Master Gardeners as a resource. Think of us in field days. Let's get ourselves, you and me together and try and plan something.
Deal.
But also, if you have, remember that if you have something that you want to trial and, you can provide seeds, a couple of seeds for, a
Sure.
district or a county, and you want us to do some things in our own backyard for you, we can be citizen scientists for you as well.
Oh, I love that. My most recent personal backyard experiments tulip bulbs. So I put them in the crisper over the winter and now they're emerging. So if that works, then let's replicate that.
Okay. We're up for any crazy ideas, of course.
Yes, I
All
love
right.
y'all. Y'all are so fun.
Good, good. Okay, well, we had a great turnout. I want to thank you and have a great rest of the semester, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Prissy. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.